Helldivers 2 has been such a fascinating topic in the gaming community over the last couple of months. To begin with, the game was met with both pure adoration and sheer dismay, as the game was so much of an overnight success that people had to literally queue just to get into the game, which Arrowhead were not expecting. In the following weeks, a ton of creators and news outlets, including myself, were singing Arrowhead's praises like our lives depended on it. And for a brief while, we gamers were finally getting a glimpse into the good life of what a love child live service game could actually be. And then the devs started deving and Sony, well, started big Sonying, and before we knew it, the player base was crumbling away. But today, okay fine, not today, I was kind of sick last week and this video got really pushed back, but back to past me, that might just be changing, as it would seem as though things are starting to finally turn the corner and the light is shining through. Today, let's talk over the huge changes that dropped with the most recent Warbond and what it means for the bleak future of Helldivers 2. My name is BigWynter, and let's do this. For democracy. Whilst I thought the last big patch we had would hold the record for a while, the 13th of June patch is in fact a light novel, so strap in and I'll summarize everything as concisely as I can. Feel free to pause the video at any point for more on-screen info, but I'll group as many of the similar changes together and stay tuned until the end for something entirely new that was added. Starting off with what I'm sure most people are interested in is the balance changes to the weapons and stratagems. First, on the weapons, the following weapons have had buffs to their damage to the durable parts, and they are the Liberator and Concussive variant, the Stalwart and Guard Dogs, Adjudicator, Tenderizer, and the Diligence. Some weapons also saw further additional buffs, such as the Tenderizer, which saw increases to damage and stagger, but a reduction in mag size and count. The Purifier saw a welcome buff to armor penetration and the damage fall-off range. The CB9 crossbow saw an increase to armor penetration and can now close bug holes and fabricators, thank the Eruptor saw a damage buff per shot, and the Adjudicator saw a buff to the mag capacity. Additionally, many weapons also saw changes to their recoil stance modifiers and to their reticles, which have been much nicer ergonomically in my opinion, and should further reward actions like crouching or laying prone with better accuracy. Moving on to the stratagems, we saw a massive reshuffle for many of the lesser used stratagems, and the following also buffs in some way, shape, or form. Starting us off, we have the Rocket Sentry, which saw buffs across the board in damage, range, economy, and target priority. This was already good in my opinion, but this just makes it better. The Machine Gun Sentry had its cooldown reduced, the HMG emplacement now turns faster, both mines saw a damage buff, the Orbital Gatling saw buffs for damage all around and a reduction in cooldown, the Orbital Precision Strike saw decreases in cooldown and cooldown, Airburst now has a shorter cooldown, the Rocket Pod saw a strange set of changes, but Arrowhead have assured us that it's actually a buff, and in my opinion it feels like it so far. My homie, the Eagle Strafing Run, saw a buff to the number of call-ins per mission and to the penetration, which brings me great joy. The Grenade Launcher saw a damage buff. The Heavy Machine Gun saw fairly substantial buffs to damage, stagger, and ergonomics. The Middle Machine Gun saw better reloads across the board and was joined by the Machine Gun Sentry, the Gatling Sentry, and the Exosuit Gatlings in a buff to damage overall. And all sentries saw a buff to durability. And what we've all been waiting for, the Javelin actually does what it says on the tin and functions properly now. I know I speak for a ton of people when I say these changes are very much welcome, as if you wanted to take the game seriously, there were really only a few loadouts for stratagems and to some extent the weapons that you could take in if you actually wanted to win on the higher difficulties. But with these changes, the orbitals have seen some serious love, and the 500 kilo might just get some well-deserved rest. Next up, I wanted to touch on the gameplay changes, as we saw some fairly substantial ones here. Firstly, the absolute ball ache, that is the AA defense modifier, has been removed for the time being, meaning no more missions where you can only take in 3 stratagems. With all these changes to the stratagems, we're seeing a big shift promoting diversity of loadouts, and limiting these to 3 per mission was previously funneling people into using only the meta heavy hitters. Furthermore, the retrieve personnel missions have been removed for now. These missions have already seen quite a few tweaks since launch, but they still weren't exactly quite right or the most fun. So I'm happy to see these take the bench until they're being reworked. Super samples now drop on difficulty 6, allowing players to collect them whilst playing more casually. Although I think I speak for most people when I say it's common samples that I actually want to see more of, super samples are very rarely the limiting factor, at least for me. Seif call-ins will remain active during ion storms and jam events. Plus, they will remain after the mission time, even after the super destroyer has left orbit. And we had the 3 more minor changes to the very specific melee range issue, chatting from in-game menus, and first-person crosshairs to improve readability. Additionally, invite-only lobbies are now available. Moving on next to the planet changes, you'll be happy to hear that we've had some great ones here. The spike plants on Terminid planets no longer cause a bleed or stamina drain, rather they deal slightly more damage over 3 burst instances. Fire tornadoes should no longer look like they're actively seeking you out for Helldiver barbecue, and the enemy visibility is reduced during fire tornadoes, but the Helldivers are not. Tremors are now more random and slightly larger, plus the visual indicator is a bit more prevalent, and the ion storms have a more audible indication when they're active. Fog and poor visibility planets should be less severe, and lamps and other artificial light sources should no longer be brighter than a supernova, which is great. Unexploded in-map hell bombs can now immediately go off if they're hit with enough force, rather than that short delay that there normally is. And vegetation that would cause the slow effect will now give the added benefit of additional stealth and stacks with things like nighttime, crouch, or prone. To be completely honest with you, I thought it did this already, but that's good to know that it actually works now. We've also seen a number of changes to the enemies. The acid effect from things like hunters now only slows by 30% instead of 50%, and Helldivers can still sprint while slowed, but the duration has been increased by 1 second. I absolutely loathe the hunters with my very being, so I am immensely pleased by this. Super heavy hitters like the Bile Titans will now spawn less frequently in favor of more hordes, promoting the use of horde weapons rather than a spam of 500 kilos. And the recent patrol changes that we saw have been reverted, thank God. Although sadly, medium and larger enemies won't be stunned as easily. This is mostly in reference to the pummeler, but it won't affect things like stunning stratagems such as the EMS strike. Specifically looking now at the Terminids, the spewers have seen a slight nerf, and their spew attack has been fixed to only hit once per stream instead of accidentally doubling up or tripling up, resulting in 1 hit. This should now be much better. The Bile Titan heads are also slightly weaker, specifically to things like the railgun, and they also had the same acid spew tweak, so less instant deaths here too. Charger behemoths will now spawn more on higher difficulties and will tank a ton more damage, and the regular chargers will show the bleed out effect a bit more readily and easily. Now onto the automatons. The same rework for the acid spew is now true for the Hulk Scorchers. The damage should no longer stack, resulting in tons of insta-kills, which is great. The tank's front armor is now the same as the non-vented on the back. It was supposed to be stronger on the front, but the visual indicator didn't quite reflect that, so Arrowhead have just sagged it off. The little jump pack wanker's explosion on death has been nerfed by 50%, but it now will set you on fire, which I'd absolutely love to see. I'm well aware that this was a ton of info to digest, so feel free to skip back to any points and pause to take a look. But finally, the brand new feature added is to the Galactic War map. We will now be able to see supply lines and origins of attack, relating especially to things like global orders. This might not mean much to many, but it does now give us the ability as a community to stop attacks and advancements at their source, which is really cool and is an exciting development that's only really achievable in a well-managed live service game. There are also a number of fixes to known bugs during this patch, so I'm going to leave them on screen if you want to take a look, or I will link the full Steam post with all of the changes in the description for you. What do you make of these changes? Are there any that you didn't feel were needed, or were there some that you were hoping to see that didn't quite make it? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Drop a like and sub if this was helpful at all. I'd really appreciate it. Feel free to take a look at my channel too for other gaming content, such as gaming reviews if you haven't quite finished your food. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and much love.